At this point in the Apology, Socrates has been sentenced to death. Although P seems quite willing to accept his fate, his friends are rather upset, and so he gives an argument in order to reassure them. And the point of this argument is to try to establish that death is nothing to fear. And he claims, even though earlier he said he knows nothing about, what happens after death, he says there is great reason to hope that death is a good. And he considers essentially two possibilities. The first is that death is a state of nothingness and utter unconsciousness. The second possibility is death is a change and migration of the soul from this world to another. So he infers that if there is no consciousness after death, but a sleep undisturbed even by dreams, death will be an unspeakable gain, because then eternity will be but a single night. If death is a journey to another place where the dead abide, no good can be greater. Now he claims that once you've arrived in the world below, the afterlife, you're delivered from the professors of justice, not in the sense of like people who teach justice, but people who claim justice in this world. And he claims that there in the underworld, the afterlife, you'll find true judges who are righteous in life. And if this occurs, then the trip will be worth making. And Socrates claims that he looks forward to talking to ancient heroes who suffered death through unjust judgment. And there, in the afterlife, he'll be able to continue his search. He'll find out who is wise, who pretends to be wise, and who is not wise. And he thinks this world will be a better place. In this world, they do not put a man to death for asking questions. Because for the obvious reason, he says, perhaps somewhat jokingly, besides being happier than we are, they will be immortal. Now, Socrates' argument can be presented as in what in philosophy is called a dilemma, where there are two options and they lead to either two other possibilities or one. Now, the dilemma Socrates presents here, the death is nothing to fear dilemma, works like this. If death is a state of nothingness or migration from this world, if it is a state of nothingness, it's good. If death is a journey, it's good. Neither of these are things to fear, so death is nothing to fear. Now, if we want to be a bit more formal in our logic, we can lay out the dilemma as a valid deductive argument, such that if all the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. And so a dilemma in this form that Socrates is presenting would have the following form. If P then Q, if R then Q, P or R, Q. And it's a valid argument, because if it's true that P gets you Q, and it's true that R gets you Q, and your only two options are P or R, then you got to get a Q. And so going back to Socrates' death dilemma, essentially what he's saying is, if death is just unconsciousness, then that's good, and nothing to fear. If death is going to a heaven-like place, then that's good, also nothing to fear. Death is either utter unconsciousness or going to a heaven-like place, therefore we must conclude it's nothing to fear. So although what he presents is a valid argument, a dilemma of a particular sort, he seems to be making a basic mistake in logic here, committing what is known as a false dilemma, which is a fallacy. This occurs when there are only two options presented, but there are or might be other options. Now, the reason why this is a fallacy can be shown by looking at the form presented with the other possibilities. So, a false dilemma, presented as an invalid argument, a deductive fallacy, would look like this. There are other variations, but this will be sort of our template example. Premise 1, if P then Q. Premise 2, if R then Q. Premise 3, P or R or S or other options. Therefore, Q. And as you can see from the structure of this, Q would not fall from this. It might, if P gets you Q and R gets you Q, and you have an option of P or R or S, there's a chance you might get Q. But with a deductive argument, the idea is that it's not you get a chance to get it. It's that if all the premises were true, the conclusion must be true. And it could be true that if death is like being unconscious, then it's good. It could also be true that if death is like, going to heaven, then that's good. And it can be true that one option is death is unconsciousness. It can also be true that one option is that death is going to heaven. But Socrates, the critics would say, have left off other possibilities. So if it's or S or something else, then Q is not guaranteed to fall. It might, but not guaranteed. So what could be some other possibilities? Well, we don't have to look very far to consider some other options. One would be, of course, when you have a afterlife that has a good, what we typically call like a heaven, it usually also has a opposite number, namely hell. And hell is really bad. So if the options are unconsciousness, heaven, or hell, then if it's the hell option, that would be something to fear, something bad. And there can be many other options as well, such as reincarnation, or your imagination is the limit. For example, years back, there was a Tales from the Crypt story. And this is an old, kind of a anthology of horror. Each episode would be like a small, short horror story. And one of them, the idea was that when you die, you're still conscious. You just can't move, and you experience everything that the corpse experiences. And so that would be pretty horrible. So, given how smart Socrates was supposed to be, why would he commit such a basic error in logic? Well, people who defend Socrates often point out that he wasn't trying to make a good argument to establish, his conclusion. He was trying to reassure his friends that things would be fine. So it's more of a reassurance than an effort to prove something logically. But whatever his intent, the argument does have that obvious defect. Now, true, if those are the only two options, and neither is anything to fear, death is nothing to fear. But we don't know that those are the only two options. And so that finishes the death dilemma. Next, we'll go on to the end of the apology.